Hello, everybody. Once again, this is Fred Wanko coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Island TV. And as usual, I'd like to say good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to you, depending on where you are around the world. Today, I'm dealing with a very, very serious topic. And if you notice in the introduction, there was no time for dancing and all those things I do just to rev things up. The reason is that Nigerians don't know our history. And this is serious historical stuff. And I want you to really focus from beginning to the end. If you've never shared my video before, this is one to share. This is history. This is classroom stuff. This is what your children and our children and many don't learn in Nigeria, because the cabal that rules Nigeria have decided not to tell the history of Nigeria so that Nigerians can learn how to solve our problems and understand that the divide and conquer we're dealing with today has a historical starting point. But before I get into it, I want you to hear a soundbite about what happens to people who are divided and conquered.
If you collect 100 black ants and 100 fire ants and put them in a jar, nothing will happen. But if you take the jar, shake it violently, and leave it on a table, the ants will start killing each other. Red believes the black is the enemy, while black believes the red is the enemy, when the real enemy is the person who shook the jar. The same is true in society. Men versus women, black versus white, faith versus science, young versus old, etc. Before we fight each other, we must ask ourselves, who shook the jar?
Fellow Nigerians, who shook the Nigerian jar? At 66 years old, I can recall growing up in Lagos, knowing fully well that I was an Igbo person because I was taught where I came from, but never emphasizing my Igbo-ness as what defined me as a Nigerian. As a young person, I took pride in the accomplishments of Chief Obafemi Awolowo. I took pride in the accomplishments of Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe. I took pride in the accomplishments and the grace and style of the leadership of Alhaji Tafawa Balewa. And I took pride in a lot of things that Nigerians were getting into, whether it's as teachers, whether it's as medical doctors, whether it's as engineers, whether it's pioneering into the new fields in architecture, and just name it. It was a beautiful thing to see Nigerians get into all kinds of endeavors. And for me as a young person, it didn't matter who that Nigerian was. It didn't matter if that Nigerian was Igbo, Yoruba, Hausa, Fulani, Edo, Efik, or whatever. In school, and I went to school at government demonstration schools through Lagos, my friends were Yorubas. My closest friend before the Civil War was a person called Olu, and I wouldn't pretend that I remember the last name because I haven't seen Olu since 1967 when we left Lagos for the Civil War. Olu was my best friend at government demonstration school, and until this day it crosses my mind what became of Olu. What could Olu be doing today? And coming back to Lagos after the Civil War, I transferred from CICA Enugu to CMS Grammar School, Lagos. And at CMS Grammar School, Lagos, my closest friend was Anthony George. And my neighborhood friends included Moyo Nigbanjo, Morayo Nigbanjo, Rena Nakbodia from Urobo, Shokare Nakbodia, Paul, I forgot Paul's last name. Paul is from Benin. Muiwa and Alaba from Benin. I mean, just name it. But that doesn't undermine the fact that I had a lot of Igbo friends. But many of my Igbo friends were not in Lagos. So all through high school and until I left Nigeria, most people I hung out with were Yorubas. And I didn't see them as Yorubas in the sense of this tribe that is an obstacle to my success. And they didn't see me as Fred Nwankwo, this guy that is an obstacle to what they're going to do in Nigeria. But I must tell you that I'm sad to say that I have gone on through the years and even developed new friendships that cut across Nigeria. But in 2023, compared to 1978 when I left Nigeria, I can see Yorubas acting as Yorubas. I can see Igbos acting as Igbos, especially those two tribes. In 1966, the documentary I'm going to show you very soon was a pogrom, a genocide committed against Igbos in particular, but it also touched ethics that they thought were Igbos and Ijos and Urobos. And those peripheral people around Igbo land who the Fulani at the time thought were Igbos, they wiped them out in the north. Tens of thousands of people hacked to death with machetes and axes and clubs. These people were fellow Nigerians. And my story would not be complete if I don't relate that genocide to what led to the genocide. What led to the genocide is what almost every Nigerian has heard. Depending on where you heard it from, it has a little slant in the story. When you hear it from Yorubas, it has a slant. When you hear it from Igbos, it has a slant. When you hear it from Fulanis, it has a slant. And on and on and on. But what led to that genocide was the coup, the January 1966 coup, in which the Fulanis especially felt that the coup was planned by Igbo army officers and that they killed the leadership of the North, especially the Fulani, and also killed Akintola in the West. But no Igbo leader was killed. And they said the coup was planned by Igbo army officers. In my last video, I showed how that coup was planned by Nigerian army officers. But that's not the bane of this video today. The point I'm trying to make is that those Igbo army officers that planned that coup, from no indication were they planning that coup under consultation with Igbos across Nigeria. They were army officers. They acted based on their instinct and based on their understanding of what was going on in Nigeria. If Yoruba army officers plan a coup and did the same thing, there's a good possibility they may have met the same fate in the hands of Fulanis. My question and my point is this: is it fair to the Yorubas or to the Igbos to wipe out a population of people that had nothing directly involved in planning a coup because somebody from their tribe was involved in the coup that led to the death of Ahmadu Bello and Tafawa Balewa? And as I record this today, I want to say once again that my heart goes out to the families of Ahmadu Bello and Tafawa Balewa, because they were fellow countrymen and women, and they were fellow Nigerians. My video today is not to knock Fulanis and patronize Igbos. My video today is to bring history to Nigerians and give Nigerians a chance to see and learn what they've never seen or what they've never got taught in schools. The story I'm telling you today doesn't absolve the Igbos from what happened that led to that pogrom. But the bane of my story today is to talk to Nigerians about Fred Nwankwo in this commentary saying something that rubs a Yoruba person the wrong way. And instead of the Yoruba person talking about what Fred Nwankwo, the person did, they translate it to what Igbos say about Yorubas. And that's what led to that genocide. Fred Nwankwo says something, and a Fulani person doesn't say what Fred Nwankwo said. They say what Igbos said. And instead of going after Fred Nwankwo and addressing it with Fred Nwankwo, they go after an entire tribe of people. And the reality is that Fred Nwankwo may have more tangible dealings with Fulanis that benefit from what Fred Nwankwo does, and very little exposure to many of the Igbos that come to bear the consequences of what Fred Nwankwo said. How can we build a nation if we're so tribalistically hateful? How can we build a nation when everything we talk about is from the prism of tribe? There's not a single bad thing that a Fulani person does that an Igbo person doesn't do, or a Yoruba person, or an Edo person. And there's not a single good thing that an Igbo person does that a Fulani person doesn't do as well, or a Yoruba person, or an Edo person. That's how civilized people see themselves. But in Nigeria, we frown at civilization when it comes to tribal matters. Everything is, this tribe is terrible, this tribe is terrible, that tribe is terrible. If these tribes are that terrible, why do we live together? Why don't we just separate and go our separate ways? I hope you enjoy the documentary, and I hope you share this video. It's very long, but you cannot buy this anywhere. It was not taught in your classrooms. But before you go into it, let me clarify that what I really liked about the story is that at the end, you saw that their sentiment was for the pain that Igbos went through. But in the beginning of the video, if you listen carefully, you'll also hear what these missionaries said about Igbos and the things they may have done that led to the dislike that led to this genocide. Why am I taking time to say this? So that we try to understand that our history is our history. The pain that came with it, we cannot erase. But the lessons that led to that pain is what I want every Nigerian, Igbos, Yorubas, Fulanis, to listen carefully and see what we can do moving forward to avoid a repeat of history. No Nigerian should treat another Nigerian as if they are superior and the other Nigerian is inferior. Part of what led to that civil war, part of what led to that hate, that led to that genocide, at least perceptively, was, according to these missionaries, one segment of Nigerians feeling that they are smarter and better, and another segment of Nigerians thinking that they are treating us inferior. There are lessons here to be learned, and every segment of Nigeria, Igbos, Fulanis, Hausas, Yorubas, everybody has something to learn from this documentary. Take time and listen to it, and I'll conclude at the end of this.
The mid-20th century, Christian missionaries have worked in the British colony of Nigeria for more than 100 years. They've established a presence alongside Islam and paganism, evangelizing, building churches, hospitals, schools, sharing the Bible, medicine, farming techniques. As the 1950s draw to a close, Nigeria's independence from the British is on the horizon, and more missionaries are coming. Part of the new challenge, promoting unity as a nation while more than 250 tribes live within its borders. Even the Nigerian national anthem recognizes the challenge afoot. Though tribe and tongue may differ, in brotherhood we stand. Hundreds of Christian missionaries are living in Nigeria. Bill and Audrey Cooley are Southern Baptist. Their assignment takes them to Jos, a town on a plateau in the country's northern region.
I was principal of Baptist High School in Jos. In fact, was sent to Jos to found the high school and get it going.
I was librarian. I taught classes, and I kept the books. So I was pretty busy with the work there at the schools.
Bob and Joanne Parham are also Southern Baptist. They live only a few miles from the Coolies. Bob works with local pastors, and Joanne takes care of administrative and domestic chores.
My work throughout the years would have been mostly with the women's organizations and the children's organizations.
Jos is a base of significant missionary activity, with hospitals, planes, and a mission school, Hillcrest, a joint effort of the many denominations to board and school MKs, missionary kids. Ruth Keeney is one, Church of the Brethren, Hillcrest Senior, yearbook editor. She also works in the Hillcrest office, where she gets to know a Nigerian employee, Hyacinth Adibemba, a member of the Igbo tribe.
He had this incredible faith, and every now and again he'd talk about how the Lord had done this for him on such and such a time. He also was very joyful. laugh easily, extremely kind.
The principal of Hillcrest is Paul Weaver, Church of the Brethren. Phyllis Wagner, Assemblies of God, teaches 7th grade. Dean Peterson, Sudan United Mission, teaches social studies. Dozens more missionaries live in Jos, with more work and influence radiating out from there. Missionaries come alongside as Nigeria seeks stability and improvement. With 50 million people, it's Africa's most populous country. But within, there are significant differences.
We had the Igbo in the east, the Yoruba in the west, and in the north, the Fulani and the Hausa. So those are the 4 major ones, but lots of people groups, lots of tribal groups.
Westerners came in, and as European powers particularly were interested now in the natural resources they could get, they began to divide up the African continent. They paid no attention to the boundaries of those ethnic groups which might have been traditional boundaries for millennia. So you have all kinds of crisscross borders mixing and matching people who didn't mix or match. So take a setting like in Nigeria.
Christianity came in, and Christianity brought education. The North was predominantly Islam, predominantly Hausa Fulani.
In the North, people are so spread out. More nomadic Fulani people wander with their herds. They don't settle in any one place. Their children don't get an education.
The Hausa, they tended to be more rural. They tended to be Muslim. The Hausa were not necessarily less intelligent, but they had less opportunity.
And there is that imaginary border there between the North and in essence, all of the South that divided this country right from the beginning.
Southerners had been exposed to Western education from missionaries and from trade along the coast.
With the Igbos, education was a defining characteristic. The school system in the East was much more advanced, and they wanted to get more education.
We have to realize the Igbos were to the south, and education came to them first. And they naturally migrated north where their talents and skill was needed. And eventually they took over the managerial positions, and the Northerners did not have the same advantages.
They had opportunity to serve in civil service, and they sort of dominated the civil service.
Work in the post office and jobs that required some education.
All the big jobs and all the important jobs, all the government jobs were Igbo, and that caused a lot of friction.
So they were becoming leading forces, so to speak, in a territory which was not really theirs.
That was a threat to the Hausas, and it wasn't their Christianity. Christianity was the mode by which they became educated in the schools. But it was what they did with that education and their own characteristics that angered the Hausas and turned the Hausas against them. It was not the fact that they were Christian. There was that religious, aspect of it. We can't say that there was none of that, but in essence, the real tipping point was tribalism and how the Igbos treated some of the Hausas up north.
Because they were, in some cases, fairly arrogant. They're saying, in effect, to the northern people, we are better than you are. We look at all the positions that we have. We're in places of responsibility. We make decisions.
Not only were the Igbos in the Hausas' homeland living the good life when the Hausas were still, 10, 15, 20 years behind them, but it was getting rubbed into their noses.
So the paradox arose that the Igbo people developed northern Nigeria, and because the Igbo people had shown this kind of progress and achievement, their fellow countrymen and women began to be suspicious of them.
These suspicions run even to Jas, a melting pot of sorts. The coolies' gardener, Garba, is Muslim, Hausa, Northerner. He does not particularly care for the Eastern Igbos being in Jas, but the city is a draw for nationals and expatriates alike.
We were living in sort of a favored part of the country. Things went well there. Jas has an ideal climate almost. This is the place where people went for their vacations. They went there to get away from things, not to get into things.
You had a little cooler weather. You could grow more things in your garden.
There was a main street through the town, beautiful street lined with flamboyants, and had the shops in it that expatriates used most of all.
And on the outskirts of Jas, the Baptist High School, the boarding school begun by the coolies, where Nigerian boys of various tribes live and study, where they are reminded each day of a psalm, now a hope, a vision.
Psalms 133:1.
Kíyèsí, ó ti dára, ó sì ti dùn fún àwọn ọmọ ará láti máa jùmọ̀ gbé ní ìrẹ́pọ̀.
Behold how good and pleasant it is when brethren live together in unity. We knew that we were going to have students from many tribal backgrounds. And in fact, at one time we calculated we had students from more than 30 tribal backgrounds there. We knew that if we did not do what we could to defuse this situation before it ever came up, that we would always have a problem of tribal enmity. So that's something we hammered on right from the beginning.
It was a good foundation that Reverend Dr. Cooley started with. It took Igbos, it took Hausa, it took Yoruba.
But unity is fragile, and Nigerian unity will be cracked by a coup. January 15th, 1966. The year begins with a coup as military officers topple Nigeria's leadership. Most of the officers behind the coup are Igbo. Those killed are not. Regional and ethnic lines bubble up, with missionaries in their midst. Ruth Berry, a Southern Baptist doctor, writes home about the cloak and dagger games afoot after the coup. The coup is viewed by many northern Nigerians as an Igbo plot, an attempt to control the country. Mark Thompson is a Lutheran at the Theological College of Northern Nigeria near Jos. He and his wife Mary Lou write back to their Board of Foreign Missions that the Igbos are now head of the army and promise freedom from political tyranny and tribalism. A big order for anyone. Sunday, May 29th. Southern Baptist missionary Bob Parham is taking other missionaries from Jos to Kano for a flight out of the country. Riding shotgun, Brethren missionary Buzz Bowers. They never make it to Kano. En route, Parham has to stop his Peugeot 404.
As we approached Zaria, a town before we would get to Kano, we saw smoke, we saw fires, and we realized we were driving into a riot of some sort. And I was told not to use my camera too prominently. That might attract attention to us.
The car in front of them was turned over and the people were killed. They came to the car that Bob and the others were in and started shaking it and threatening. And somehow Bob persuaded them not to turn their car over, and they proceeded to the one behind it.
There was a Baptist compound there at Zaria that we knew we better head for safety. So we ended up at the Baptist mission. We were kind of concerned, they were concerned there too about some of their people who were out in villages.
Parham knows fellow Southern Baptist Art Campere is preaching nearby and is likely unaware of the immediate trouble. Parham heads for a village church in Kwangila, where he updates the congregation and fetches Campere.
And we decided we would not continue on to Kano with our passengers, but transfer them to a vehicle from the mission there.
And so James Yarbrough said, I will take these 3 on Tucano, you all go back to Jos.
That violent episode is one of several in the North targeting Igbos for abuse, mutilation, or killing. Igbo homes and businesses are looted, while some Igbos try to evacuate via train. A June 2nd memo from Church of the Brethren missionary Roger Ingold reveals the magnitude of the problem. It appears that the press has been playing down the extent and severity of the demonstrations, rioting, and damage done. The report is that many hotels and buildings owned by Igbos have been destroyed, and it seems that there has been considerably more loss of life than has been reported. Ingold ends the memo. I note a few examples of some additional strain and tension on some of the missionaries working here. Catholic leaders are on edge over the tribal conflict, which they note is fueled by rumor.
Rumors were rampant. Rumors and counter-rumors. Everybody had a rumor. You could have spent all your time trying to sort them out, but there was no need to because they could not be sorted out.
Some sources indicate that hundreds of thousands of Igbos have already fled the northern region, but more Igbos remain, despite rumors of more violence.
The place where most of the conversations about things like that took place was the faculty room at Hillcrest School. Here you had teachers from all of the different mission entities, and the missionaries were all over the country. They would send word back to their people, their house parents at the hostels, and the hostels would tell the teachers, and from the Baptists to the Assemblies of God to the Mennonites to the Church of the Brethren to the Lutherans.
You became a little more apprehensive as each day went by and trying to determine, is this rumor my rumor or headed for me? There was no way we could barricade a big campus sitting out in the rural open. It was just not anything that we could do, so we just tried to keep life moving along.
We had heard rumors of trouble coming to Jos. I went one Sunday morning to one of our country churches. We called them bush churches. That Sunday morning, an Igbo recited the 91st Psalm.
You will not fear the terror of the night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that stalks in darkness, nor the destruction that wastes at noonday. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you.
He said it with such depth of meaning. It said to me, these people are well aware they are facing a great trouble.
Bob and Joanne Parham write from the Baptist Mission in Jos that uncertainty and tension have filled the atmosphere for months now. They pray that Nigeria's leaders will have divine guidance as they work to solve the country's problems. At the Baptist High School in Jos, Bill and Audrey Cooley one day receive a memorable visit. The older brother of one of their students, an Igbo named Jonathan Ikeriawu, is concerned.
Jonathan's brother came from Bukaru to talk about Jonathan's future, and more specifically, with it appearing that some trouble was certain that would involve Eastern peoples, which they were, what would be best to do for Jonathan. Whether to take him back to Bukaru and try to keep him safely with the family there, or whether to leave him at the school. I told the brother that the choice was his, theirs, the family's. If they wanted to take him home, that was certainly their prerogative. Or if they wanted to leave him at school, we would do the best we could for him.
The family makes a crucial decision. Jonathan will stay at the school. Harvey and Thelma Kiekover are Christian Reformed Church missionaries. They live a couple of 100 miles south of Jos, in McCurdy, in the northern region. September 21st, morning.
We were expecting and had a Hausa Malam come to help us learn Hausa. And he came and said, terrible things are happening in the town. And then he described a little bit of what was happening in terms of killing of Igbos.
The Kiekovers are foreigners in a strange land and new to Nigeria.
A young man named Oko was working for us, but Oko was an Igbo. So we were very frightened and uncertain about what to do. Linus is our steward. He works for us. Began working for us when we came to McCurdy. Wonderful man. It was Linus who said, it's not safe to go into the town, but there is a way through the field from here to the rail station. And he said, I can take Oko to the rail station and get him there. Oko knew he had to get out, and we paid him for his work. And we said farewell to him, gave him a little money for his trip, and he left with our prayers for his safety. Very unsure. He took him to the train station, and in about 2 hours he was back without Oko. And he said they had gotten to the train station safely and Oko was there. Around 6 o'clock, we heard the train whistle. And we prayed that that haunting sound was good and that Oko was on that train.
Lee Boz is another Christian Reformed Church missionary in the region. His assignment, mobile evangelism, traveling to different villages and showing gospel films. In Zaki Biam, Boz finds himself in the middle of the coming purge.
The national pastor came to me and said, Lee, I want to show you my field. Well, I never go and see his field. I thought, I wonder what's going on out the field. And he said, our people have hidden some of the Igbos. Tonight, we're sending some to your house, and you have to take them to the Cameroon. What do you say? I said, okay. So here at midnight, I don't know why midnight, at midnight, here I come. At that time, I had a very small Opel. There's just a small Opel. We got 13 adults in there. I took them over to the border through Takum area around Wukari and took them to the border. Well, we couldn't get everybody who was there, and so he said, do it the next night. So we did it again the next night. Came to a roadblock with police. Very fortunately, the road went one way to go to the river and the other way to go to the Cameroons. And so by God's grace, I slowed down and I put on my blinker light and went way on that side of the road, and the police all went to that side of the road, and I quickly swung back and went. And we were hoping we wouldn't get shot. I can tell you, I have never heard silence so loud as when the people saw the police.
The intensity of the problem in these other areas and what missionaries experience and do there remains mostly unknown in Jos. The tension there is mounting. Beverly Nuth teaches language arts at Hillcrest. She and Carl Eisman are also assistant house parents at Elm House, an off-campus hostel for Lutheran missionary kids. She writes home September 27th. The trouble within the country is far from settled, and most of the people feel something may blow up on Saturday.
We were told that we should keep the kids, the hostel students, close to the hostel and not let them go into Jos to the markets or anything on that weekend.
Wednesday, September 28th. Harry Bohr, principal of the Theological College of Northern Nigeria, near Jos, is restless. He drives 10 miles to Jos to visit Edgar Smith. Edgar and Nell Smith are well-connected and longtime missionaries in Nigeria. Bohr hopes Smith can reassure him. Smith cannot. As Bohr heads back to TCNN, 2 soldiers tell him, "Go back to your school and stay there. Tomorrow, there will be big trouble." Students meet Bohr on his arrival back at campus. Afraid for what is to come, they suggest that Bohr turn off the floodlights illuminating the college's distinctive chapel tower. Bohr tells them not to fear, saying, "Receive anyone who might come to us for refuge. Therefore, the chapel tower must remain lit." Jos, later that evening.
The phone rang, picked it up. The first words we heard was, "It has started." And we knew immediately what it was, that the rumors were now fulfilled.
On the other end of the line, Archie and Margaret Dunaway, house parents at the Baptist Hostel for Hillcrest.
So we knew it had started.
And we listened out the windows. We could hear dogs barking and screaming.
And I looked out the window and I saw the mob. But anytime this mob would think that there was an Igbo or it was called out, it was somebody from the south, they would chase after them. And then you'd hear the whacking. I'm gonna cry. Yeah. We knew they were being beaten in the grass.
Audrey and I were discussing this throughout the night. What could we do? What should we do? We had a few students and a few teachers who were of Eastern origin. What could we do? And the plan we came to was to bring them to the compound where we lived, which was about a mile from the school.
Well, we were a little concerned about Garba.
He had been working with us for a number of years, but he was of Northern origin. I told him, we cannot bring them here unless I have your word that you will protect them as we are protecting them. And he didn't answer immediately. He went off to think about it for a little while. He came back. He said, "I won't do it for them, but I'll do it for you." I knew him well enough to know that he was a person of honor. On that compound, there was an empty house. The person who ordinarily occupied it was on furlough at the time.
And he brought them over and put them in the little house that we had. We closed up all the windows and made it look like it was still vacant.
Thursday, September 29th, morning.
We knew, you could feel it inside of yourself that it's happening. All the rumors and all of what we were told might be happening or that had happened in other places had come to Jos.
As knowledge of the violence filters into Hillcrest, Principal Paul Weaver faces a decision: cancel classes or carry on. With no immediate threat to the missionary community, Hillcrest holds school in an effort to maintain a sense of normalcy for the children. But problems soon move into campus.
As a physical education teacher, I was outside on the basketball courts. And I remember seeing a Nigerian man running across the compound up above the basketball courts and into one of the classrooms.
I caught out of the corner of my eye a single man coming up from the road, and it seemed very obvious to me that he was running away from something. And I was concerned. My door was right in line with the direction he was going. I really did not want that man coming in there, but he did come in. And I went to meet him immediately. I didn't want those seventh graders to be disturbed or alarmed in any way about what was going on. I said to him, as best as I can remember, "You can't stay in this room." And he said to me, "But madam, I don't want to die. I don't want to die." And so I said, "Come with me."
Wagner exits the classroom with the Igbo man, but he leaves Wagner to join a nearby group he perceives as friendly. Meanwhile, Principal Weaver knows that Hillcrest employs several Igbos, among them Hyacinth Adabemba.
When I went into the office, Hyacinth was not there, and I was really concerned. I asked about him, and I was assured that they believed that he was okay. I know I asked a number of questions, and I got sort of a vague response. He was hidden supposedly in the rafters in our sanctuary in the church. I was led to believe that it was Paul Weaver, but I'm not 100% sure.
Back at TCNN, classes never began. A walk to the classroom building is punctuated by a shout, "Look, there come the Igbos." Moore and others turn to see Igbos emerging from among eucalyptus trees, running in their direction. Some Igbos head directly to the campus. Others scatter into the boulders behind the college. Warg Lundauer, a Norwegian missionary nurse on the compound, begins treating the wounded. Moore leaves campus in the charge of Robert Martison, the new Lutheran academic dean, and speeds in his car to the Jos police compound to request protection. In Jos, Igbos are being hacked to death and their property looted.
They did not have guns, but they had matches, sticks, and stones. That's the way they were killed.
Oh, they were just hacked with machetes or any way they could kill somebody, get rid of them, cut up.
We could see people walking by our home carrying supplies that they had looted from the homes. Somebody would be carrying a bag of goods over their shoulder. They might even be carrying the easy chair.
There was wholesale slaughtering going on. Elm House, we had our Igbo staff, and they were away from their homeland.
I'm sure people around knew that we had Igbo employees and they would be targeted.
Paul and Margaret Griebel, house parents at Elm House, decide to send the children of the Lutheran hostel to Mountain View, the hostel of the Christian Reformed Church. They then bring roughly 15 Igbos into Elm House, hiding them in a kitchen storeroom. Paul Griebel and Carl Eisman remain with the Igbos.
As the evening wore on, we knew things were going on, but they're around us, but there wasn't anything directed at us. So we thought, well, let's try to get some sleep. And that lasted about a half an hour. And that's when we heard noise in our driveway. And we could see figures in the night that were growing in number. You can't actually create the horror of a true mob that wants to kill someone. They were coming to a crescendo, and I'm standing in the shadows with my hunting knife, and my knees are shaking, and Paul is sitting at the table reading scripture. And to be honest, I was extremely confused as to what to do. If they break down the door, which they could easily do en masse, I'm standing there with my hunting knife, and I'm going, should I stand there and say, okay, you have to go over me to get to them and protect them, knowing that in the frenzy that they were in, they would just kill me, no matter who I was. I mean, you're out of control when you're like that. Should I step aside? Because I'm not who they're after. Where is my moral obligation? And I'm standing here, and all this is going through my mind. And Paul is over at the table praying and reading scripture. And all at once there's dead silence. And I'm, Paul, what happened? I don't know. We look out the windows and the crowd is beginning to disperse. We never knew that night what had caused this mob to disperse when they were so ready to come in.
Friday, September 30th.
I went in looking to see, was the market open? Were there shops open, something that we might need? There were just bodies, corpses.
Bob Parham from the Baptist Mission is one of several missionaries who moves through Jos, assessing the situation. He finds 9 bodies in a couple of blocks, and another dead body on the Hillcrest campus. Parham takes the body, with the help of Assemblies of God missionary David McCauley, to the morgue. As Paul Griebel and Carl Eisman emerge from Elm House that morning, they find a dead body in the front yard. The man has been beaten to death with rocks from their rock garden. Paul and Carl hide the body in the elephant grass. Then, around mid-morning on Friday, September 30th, various reports hold that the unchecked killing winds down quickly in much of the north. Some of the wounded and scared remain in hiding across the north. Others of them begin to emerge from the bush. Missionaries and others start searching for survivors and finding the dead. Carl Lindauer, the husband of Nurse Bjorg and himself the architect of many mission buildings, including TCNN, enters the boulder formation behind the college. He finds a man wounded but alive, and 26 dead bodies. Missionary Edgar Smith visits the Jos police compound to find more than 100 Igbos gathered there for safety. It is becoming a refugee camp.
I wondered to myself, why are the trash trucks out picking up trash now? And it wasn't until our night watchman came and told us that the trash trucks were out picking up the bodies. He had walked past the dump, the city dump, and he had seen where they had bulldozed deep trenches. And these trash trucks that had picked up bodies backed up to these trenches and just opened up the back end and dumped the bodies. He was a Hausa man, and it made him feel bad.
We had heard that one could get through the city and that they were digging mass graves on the other side of the city because so many people had been killed, that if we could get the body there, they would take care of it. We were pretty anxious going across town, but we got to the mass graves, and a sight that I will never forget. Rectangular, big holes filled with bodies.
Attention begins to shift toward aiding the wounded and needy who continue to gather, if at all possible, at the police compound. Photographing what transpires, Marion Bricker, Church of the Brethren music teacher at Hillcrest. He takes pictures from the waist, not wanting to draw attention. Missionaries at Hillcrest began collecting clothing and other items to take to the compound. Even as they work to meet the direct need, they, along with the European business community and Jos, think ahead to what must happen next.
How can we save lives? And so they thought if we could separate the houses of the north from the Igbos of the east, perhaps lives could be saved.
Saturday, October 1st, a twofold need intensifies: care for the wounded and send as many as possible, as quickly as possible, back to the east. The situation in Jos remains so dire that Edgar Smith and Roger Ingold request a mission plane to Lagos, the capital. Ingold scribbles a letter back to mission headquarters in Illinois. I'm on what may prove to be a very dangerous mission. It must be done. Some will hate us for it, could seek revenge. Ingold and Smith's mission meet with Yakubu Gowon, Nigeria's supreme commander. They want to give him an eyewitness account of atrocities in the north and request immediate relief for those still there, who could otherwise be completely eliminated. It has been terrible in Jos. Many Igbos and Southerners killed, mostly clubbed and bludgeoned to death. vast looting. Missionaries, missionary kids, and other expatriates and Jos converge on the police compound. Just outside the compound, Carl Eisman is reminded that danger continues.
There are people, men, lying on each side. I'm not sure how many there were. There might have been 15. And they were just lying out there. They were, it was hot. They had been injured to the point that they couldn't get in. And one might say, well, why didn't somebody come out and get them in? Well, there's two reasons for that. One, everybody was so busy with so many people that had so many needs, they just had their hands full. The other was there were Hausa gangs not more than 20 yards away, sitting on some rocks and boulders with their machetes, with some clubs, and you looked into their eyes and you knew that they were waiting for the opportunity to go down and finish the job. So we went back into the compound, we got a makeshift stretcher, and over the course of time, we brought each man in and took them to where they were giving medical attention.
Chaos. Pure chaos is what I remember.
We saw children walking around not knowing where their parents were. We saw parents walking around calling for their children.
Carrie Robison is a junior at Hillcrest. Her parents are Assemblies of God missionaries stationed back in the East.
I remember seeing a lot of very, very, very wounded people. I remember noise. I remember crying. I remember screaming.
There was an area which there were a few doctors and nurses that were attending to some of the people that were in the worst of need. That was the horrible part.
There were a lot of head wounds is what I remember. They were vicious wounds like machete chops. I remember seeing strong men with the muscles cut all the way to the bone. I remember punctured eyeballs. I remember arrows through the cheeks, holes, and machete chops to the skull, right to the bone. You could tell they'd lost their mind from so many head wounds and trauma.
Linda Skolton is a friend of John Price's, also a Hillcrest sophomore. She lives at Mountain View, the hostel for MKs from the Christian Reformed Church.
We would wash the wounds, try to give some kind of comfort measure, and we could give them aspirin, give them a drink, put a pillow under their head or a blanket or something, just try to make them comfortable.
I remember specifically using these big long tweezers to pick maggots out of a face wound. We were cleaning his wounds literally so that he could be stitched up.
The amazing part was we saw our missionary teacher friends. We saw our high school kids from Hillcrest. These were our kids.
More Igbos and Easterners keep appearing at the police compound. Preparations move forward to begin hauling them out of Jos by lorry, train, and plane. One of the first planes out is a mission plane. On board, Bob Parham, who accompanies a few wounded Igbos back to the east. But some, like the Cooley's faculty and students, remain in hiding.
Our friends told us there will be a plane coming through on such a day. And if you have your people to the airport at that time, if you can get them there, they can get on the plane and go to safety. But things were still a shambles.
He knew that there were many, many roadblocks between our house and the airport.
We would have to pass through all those, and that they would inspect the vehicle and inspect the contents of the vehicle. And our contents were going to be Eastern people.
he started going through roadblocks, all the roadblocks he knew about, and at different times of the day.
I knew that if I could get those military and police personnel well acquainted with my vehicle, that would be in our favor.
Before long, they started just waving him through because they knew he was harmless. I was very confident that Bill's plan would work.
Sunday, October 2nd. In the wee hours of the morning, roughly 20 lorries packed with Igbos and Easterners leave Jos for the east. The Jos police station is still covered up with people needing help.
But they had no food, so the missions, we decided we needed to take them down clothing, food, and whatever we could in medical items. So the hostile group, we went down.
Most of the time, I spent cleaning wounds. I was on my way to go wash some wounds for some people that were on a different mat, and then this individual called my name. And I think the only reason that he knew me was because I had interacted with him in the businesses during my senior year. He had wounds to be cleaned as well, and also had maggots. So I asked the nun if I could just stay there and clean his head, and she said yes. And then he asked me if I could be his daughter, because everyone in his family had been killed except for his older daughter that he thought was my age. And I said yes. And then he asked me if I would sing some hymns and quote scripture for him. And so I did. I did Psalm 23, and I also did the Lord's Prayer, and I sang the Lord's Prayer to him. And then he just said to me, "I'm going home, my daughter." Yeah, and he died.
Now, planes began arriving in Jos to help evacuate Igbos and Easterners. Firms and banks help arrange some charter flights. One DC-6 and two Nigerian Airways Fokker friendships take a reported 600 people to the east. Sunday evening, another caravan of lorries departs Jos. As a new week begins, the airlift out of Jos is in full swing.
It wasn't a regular plane with steps, proper steps. And so they thought, well, how are we going to get these people on the plane? And they came to the conclusion they could take a table from the airport, cut off a couple of legs, put it on a forklift, tie it down, and lift the people up to put them in the airplane.
We put the larger people in the seats, and then smaller, and then if it's a child or something, there were sometimes 2 or 3 people deep on those seats. We had to make sure that we didn't get it too overloaded.
We would go out there with food, especially to feed the pilots so they could turn around and get on.
But then these people not only were afraid and nervous, and part of their family may have been killed and they had lost their possessions. Maybe they had saved a few things that would fill a pillowcase or bandana, but they couldn't take that either because of the weight.
Dean Peterson uses an evacuation plane to get a letter out because the Postal Service is no longer functioning. We have had a terrible nightmare this past week and have seen much bloodshed, the history teacher writes. People by the hundreds have been slain in cold blood. Many of the survivors are being flown out by special plane, and some are leaving by escorted road convoy. Some of those convoys stop at Emcar, near McCurdy, where Linda Skolton's parents, Herman and Helen, are stationed at Emcar. They have no idea what daughter Linda and son Bill are doing at the police compound, but Igbos keep arriving at Emcar.
I would drive the truck, and I'd load it up with people, and it was just a flatbed, big diesel truck, and we could put, in those days, probably 30 people in the back of the truck, because I would take the back roads, the dirt roads, through the country and head for Enugu. 4 hours at least.
I remember one time when, maybe it was the very first time, the whole lorry had been driven up the hill. The nurses, the wives of missionaries, we all met and we had a prayer time And we all went to our homes, and my house was really empty. And I just remember praying a lot.
The back of this truck was not a very pleasant ride because there wasn't room to sit. You had to stand up, but you got there.
Missionaries living and working in the eastern region began witnessing disturbances there. Assemblies of God missionaries Jerry and Maxine Falley work in publishing.
Eastern people had not retaliated back in May, but with this influx of so many thousands, they started forming Hausa gangs. They were out to kill.
Jerry knows his friend and co-worker Yakun Tuka is Hausa. Jerry makes sure Yakun stays hidden in the attic of their printing press.
He didn't ask to leave, but we all agreed, Andy Hargrave and Monroe Robinson, who were there at the press, we all agreed we had to get him out or he was going to die. And he went back to the north.
Finally, the coolies believe it's time to deliver their faculty and students in hiding to the airport for a flight to the east.
So we decided the best thing to do would be to put them in this vehicle, which was actually a VW bus. Put them as near into the center of that vehicle as possible. Surround them with ourselves, that is, the missionaries, even to the point of our children being in the back window looking out. That was the plan, which we put into operation and which worked.
A plane finally arrives for the coolies' faculty and students. Missionaries and others light the runway using car headlights.
Our people got on. We wished them well. We prayed with them and for them. We waved as they left. And that was it.
Friday, October 7th, and Joss, Shirley Bowers, secretary for Roger Ingold, is summoned to a private meeting. Ingold and more than a dozen other missionaries and Nigerian pastors are holding an ad hoc meeting about the crisis.
And my wife Shirley was the secretary. She was the one who knew how to take down the notes in shorthand.
Missionary Edgar Smith speaks. The chairman thinks that the best way for us to proceed would be for some of us to say what has happened. We should then say what we think caused these things and what we can do about keeping it from happening again in the future. Each person just tell briefly what he knows that has happened. Shirley Bowers fills more than 100 pages with shorthand of their conversation. Story after story, question after question. Some people were buried alive. They had been tied very firmly with ropes and then buried alive. On Friday morning in our own yard, a man was beaten to death. Not only did they kill many people, but they also destroyed their houses and took away their property. Some of our missionary personnel were at the airport meeting those coming from North America when this happened. Many of the people were killed right at their feet. The group's favorite word for what it has experienced, disturbances. Not once do they mention genocide or even pogrom. Participants at the meeting and Joss discuss another feature of what they witnessed, timing. The timing was exactly as this man told me. It happened exactly at 3 o'clock.
The killings were going on in Jos, they were going on in Kaduna, they were going on in the Benue provinces, in the Tiv country, and Sokoto and Maiduguri almost at the same time. That could not possibly be spontaneous. Somebody planned it.
Missionaries and Nigerian pastors also carefully unpack a critical interpretation of events, that what they had just experienced was not a religious war. What they did here was purely a civil matter and not something against religion. There is no evidence to indicate that there is religious importance here. I am very sorry to say this, but I think there are some of us who are trying to slant this whole thing so it would look as if this thing had a religious bias. Religion is a crucial topic at the meeting, though, and some of the stories bother the group a great deal. The boys said he was beaten by Christian men. Also, I saw many carry home the goods that they had stolen, and we identify many of them as being Christians living in this city. As has already been stated, you cannot blame only the Hausa for this, but some natives of different localities, and even some Christians. Stories about Christian involvement in killing and looting pain the missionaries and Nigerian pastors. That pain, however, is trumped only by concern over what a Christian response must now be. We have not come here to investigate government affairs, but we have come here to look at matters that have affected the church, for some Christians have taken part in these disturbances. Those of us Christians in Kaduna have been gathering together and praying. Is the church going to speak to this situation or to the people around here? A few of them might expect a word from the church. Our greatest concern here is that when there are disturbances, what Christians should do about it. What, for the sake of Jesus Christ, should we do in the future? Shortly after the atrocities, Robert Martinson at the Theological College of Northern Nigeria reflects on what happened. The sounds and sights of that day in September will linger a long time. The sound of a wooden club striking flesh and bone. The sight of blood-soaked men pleading for protection on their hands and knees, spontaneously reciting the Lord's Prayer. The uncontrolled hatred of one man for another. These are memories that alter a man's thinking. The need for the message of love and reconciliation became clearer than ever before. We at the college have been thankful for the witness we were called upon to make, and for the lives we were able to save. In this situation, we dedicate ourselves more fully to the task of preparing men to preach the gospel of peace. All that has happened, Bob Parham writes home, cannot be given in this letter. We found ourselves amidst awful experiences that cannot be forgotten in a day, writes Margaret Dunaway. So, not forgotten, but rarely mentioned.
This is the first time that we've told this story after 50 years.
During the darkest days of violence and immediately afterward, the missionary community said very little. One reason, their status as guests in the country.
I mean, we were living in their country, and we had to have visas to be there, and we could get in trouble.
You sense in a very real way that you're aliens in a foreign land, and you respect your status as a foreigner. This is not your country, even though you are horrified by what's happening.
We knew that there were people who were close up to the situation in the political sense, and if we said too much about what we had done, then questions would be raised about who did what, why, when, and so forth. So we thought it was just prudent not to say anything about it.
Caution prompted most missionaries to censor even their own letters back to the States or to loved ones elsewhere in Nigeria. It also likely played a role in how the emotional response unfolded at Hillcrest School.
I remember getting in a little difficulty with Paul Weaver. I was called into his office and questioned about an assignment that I had given to the students because I had asked them to write an essay about what had happened in Jos and how they felt about it. But I was told by him that I was not to do that, was not to continue, that it was not a good thing to do. I guess I wasn't very happy about it. I thought, it's not a bad thing for kids to write stuff down. It's for them to share. They might share it on paper where they wouldn't share it orally.
It was very hard to talk about.
I don't remember a single word about it. I think that was just the way it was in the day.
Nowadays, if there's a crisis in a school, within hours, there are counselors and law enforcement personnel and all kinds of support for the kids, as there should be. But we were not in that kind of situation there.
I asked a friend, why haven't we talked about it? Why has this not really been dealt with? And I mean, beyond the surface. And he said, I think that we as high schoolers anyway felt that if we don't talk about it, it would go away.
I think we just didn't process it back at the time. I was transcribing my diary when it made me emotional. I couldn't stop the tears. I felt drained at the end. But it was a good experience, do you know what I mean? It wasn't a negative, it was positive to process it.
And I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it.
The adults, if I put myself into their position, where I'm responsible for all these young people, these little kids and these teens, what's the best thing I can do to protect them? Prevent them from seeing more than what they've already seen, and that's to normalize everything in their everyday life as much as possible, which means not getting into deep discussions about what's going on, but continuing with school and school events. Keep it as normal as possible.
In those days, we felt strongly that we should keep this information away from students. I see it now when I look at it as a lost opportunity, that it would have been well if I had taken a different position, but I understand why I did what I did.
As missionaries and MKs returned home for furlough, college, retirement, they still shared little about what happened in Nigeria in 1966.
Even when we have gone to speak in churches, I don't think we've mentioned anything about the genocide.
People kept it to themselves because of the fact that I don't think they wanted to bring out a bad memory. And it was a very bad memory of what happened.
It was painful to remember, and you didn't like to speak so much in terms of the sensational and here's a really wild experience, and people find it difficult to understand, and you have to explain so much about it.
I don't think I ever talked about what happened in Jos. It's not something you want people to know much about, I would think, especially if you're speaking to a women's group and you want support for your mission group.
I couldn't understand why, when I would talk about some of the things, I would get a blank stare or a stifled yawn.
Well, I mentioned it to my daughter when I was in San Diego last weekend that I was doing this, and she says, "Oh, you're my father. I don't even know about stuff like that." And I didn't know what to say, but I did talk to her about it a little bit, but I didn't even talk to her in detail about it. I just kind of brushed it off, to be honest with you. But yeah, I probably should tell them about that.
No, I have never talked publicly for what I did when I transferred people to Enugu.
And why haven't you talked publicly about it?
I don't know if anyone was interested. I don't recall, after all these years, I don't recall anyone ever asking me about the time.
Thoughts of being judged for what they did or did not do also factored into the silence.
When you look back at it and you think, why didn't I do that differently? Wouldn't it have been better had I done this? Second thoughts.
You fly by the seat of your pants or by the grace of God in times like this. We had no training, no experience. And when that landed in our lap on that morning of September 21, we had no resources except to pray that God give wisdom and help us to do the right thing and not cause more harm and more damage.
I don't know if we felt guilty about what happened. I don't know if we would say it was guilt. It was a sadness, depression maybe.
It's traumatic to tell because I know that there were people who didn't make it.
No, I don't believe it's affected my faith. It's questioned as to why. Bad things.
Right. And there were terrible things.
The role of a missionary in the time of genocide is to minister to human needs.
Because we want to live out our Christianity. And if we really live it out, I think most of us really believe that it's going to make a difference. This is Christianity action. We love our brothers, we talk about it, and now we're showing that we do.
I had grown up watching missionaries live their faith, live and practice biblical principles. I watched missionaries in this time of genocide do what they were called to do, what they had always done. I would have been shocked if the missionaries hadn't done anything, because I was accustomed to seeing them in action.
I was in the chapel at school. It was early in the morning. We were having our regular morning chapel time. Well, the door opened and someone came in. But this individual continued to walk on down the aisle slowly and I would say pretty unsteadily till he got to the front. He was almost unrecognizable, but we could make out that this was indeed Jonathan, who had made his way back to the school.
It was in the night. The coolies came with their vehicle and told those of us that we are from the east that we should get our things ready, that they were going to take us somewhere. He did not tell us where. They were feeding us. They took perfect control. We were just in the house, in the room. We didn't move out of the building. Right? They just came in and said they would take us to the airport. An experience that I was frightened with. Look, I owe my life's gratitude. I am alive today because of the coolies.
One 1% of the population control the world. 4% of the population are their puppets. 90% of this population is a zombie, is a sleeping zombie. And 5% are trying to wake up the zombies. The 1% make sure that the 4% stop the 5% from waking up the 90%. This is not a war between two religions. This is not an ethnic war. This is not a racist war. It's none of these. This is the oldest trick in the book. Divide and conquer. This is what war does. They create the division. They make sure you are racist. You're controlled by fear. You are breeding hate in order to divide so they can conquer.
I don't know if you can see through my glasses, but my eyes are red, and you know why. But if you took time to watch this entire video, especially the documentary by the missionaries, you can come up with only one conclusion. And that conclusion is that we need to do something in Nigeria, and we need to do something fast. After all the blood that has been shed and continues to be shed, I'll be remiss if I say that Nigeria is still worth dying for. All I can say is that I'll continue to do what I can to bring these eye-opening messages to Nigerians, and hoping that you share my videos, because the things I bring are things that for the most part, even though one or two may have seen it in the past, many Nigerians are not aware of the truth about Nigeria that Bold Talk on Island TV continues to bring. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, this is Fred Nwankwo coming to you from our studios in Chicago with another edition of Bold Talk on Island TV. And until next time, good night and God bless.
Ndababa aija kelende mwegu ndababa ndababa ndekaraka monkri yeye ndekaraka anajari shugomuno tulaji awehura sano ndababa aija kelende mwegu ndababa ndababa ndekaraka monkri yeye ndekaraka anajari shugomuno tulaji